Hello, nerdy romantics. We are here talking Star Trek Section 31. So, if you haven't seen it yet, Star Trek Section 31 is a spin-off movie from Star Trek Discovery, and it is featuring Emperor Philippa Georgiou. She is from the parallel universe from Star Trek Discovery. So she has now somehow gotten into Section 31. I'm going to be honest, a little bit of that was muddy for me, but we are all going to talk about this in a few. Yes, let's just go ahead and do a bit of a spoiler alert right now, just in case, but we're going to try not to spoil it. But I'm going to do a spoiler alert here just in case. So, stay tuned. We're talking Star Trek Section 31. This is the Nerdy Romantics Podcast, and I'm your host, Y.M. Nelson. Okay, ladies, how we doing today?
Excellent. How about you?
All right,
Good.
I'm doing pretty good. I will say I might be doing a little better once I get everything off my chest about this movie. Because I feel some kind of way about it. I'm having a Trekkie buyer's regret moment, but we'll talk about that. But before we get started talking about my buyer's regret, Staci and Marcie, glad to have you back here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Marcie, I will say though, I believe this is the first Star Trek podcast episode you've been on. So why don't you tell us, how big of a Trekkie you are? Where did this movie come into play? What's going on? What's going on with you and the whole Star Trek universe?
So I would put myself in like a moderate Trekkie kind of zone. I've seen the original, I've seen Deep Space Nine, I've seen Voyager, I've seen a lot of the older ones. I've seen most of the movies, all of the original Star Trek movies. I've seen all but the last of the new generation of Star Trek movies, but I have not been as engaged with the newer series. So that's why I put myself in the moderate. So I'm old school Trekkie. I'm not as well versed on new school Star
Yeah.
Trek. And so when it came to the movie, I felt like it was a cool kind of intro for me because it means I didn't have to commit to an entire season of something to jump in. I could just get a quick fix and see what was going on in in that sphere. So I thought for me that was kind of the reason that I said, "Oh, I want to do this one," is because it didn't require as much commitment as the series would have in watching multiple episodes. So that was kind of my intro point. I had heard on Spotify a million times, and I think also when I was maybe it was Tubi too, also where I kept hearing the intro, the trailer, and
Yeah.
so I thought, "Oh, well, that might be interesting," and so that's kind of what hooked me in. Okay.
Staci, we've had you on for a few Star Trek episodes, but I just kind of want to get from you. Was this something I said, hey, y'all, let's do this? Or was this already on your radar? Was this something you were excited about? Tell us how you came into Section 31.
I'm not saying I was like overly excited about it, but excited when it came on because that character Philippa, she's like a problematic fave for me. I liked her and the stuff,
Mm-hmm.
even though she's horrible. I mean, granted,
Yes.
she's trying to do redeeming art, but let's face it, she's a mass murderer and she eats people, so it's not like she's
Yes.
a good person and all that, but I guess the actress, she does her really well enough to be like, that I like to see her character on the screen. So when it said Section 31, I didn't think much of it, but when it was like when they showed her, I was like, oh, let me watch Section 31 because I do like her character from the previous versions with what was the last one? And not Enterprise, where we were seeing those other. I mean, there have been so many of the new ones that I don't even remember the
Yeah.
names of the new ones until I see. I'm like, oh, that's the person's on there and this person's on there, but I can't remember all the new ones. But when she first came aboard and they started that alternate universe thing, and her
Mm-hmm.
character just was great, but at the same time,
Not
evil.
great.
I mean,
Yes.
just
Exactly.
really, really evil. And how they're, I mean, I don't want to talk any more about it, but I mean, we do, if you watched any of the previous episodes, you know that she did have her redeeming redemption arc that she's, gave that
Mm-hmm.
up, but at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, how much did she, I mean, how much can you give up? I rule a universe, kind of
Right.
thing, and then
Exactly.
gonna come back. It's like, yeah, I'm not that person anymore. I was like, wait a minute, you've ruled it for a long time. I'm not that person anymore. It's just, but she does it so well. I love seeing her on the screen. I'm
Yeah.
just entranced watching her on the screen, even if the movie wasn't all that, but I just liked. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about it yet because I'm not sure how
Okay.
far we should go into it.
How about I give just a little bit of background for our listeners out there? If you are not as Trekkie or not as nerdy as we are up here, Section 31 is kind of the undercover CIA. It's independent of Starfleet, but it is that kind of covert kind of organization that works a little bit outside of Starfleet and does some of the things that
That dirty work.
Starfleet, yeah, exactly, the dirty work. It seems like all kind of the major Federation planets seem to have kind of a covert. The Romulans have the Tal Shiar, the Cardassians have the Obsidian Order. So all the big ones that are into military, whatever, they have some kind of covert something. And I think even, well, that's more so in Discovery, how the Romulans slash Vulcans also had a kind of covert, organization there that Michael Burnham's mama, was part of. So, yeah. So a character like Philippa Georgiou, who came from a parallel universe, is kind of stuck here, and it's like, what do we do? Her falling into Section 31, that sounds pretty much, right. With Marcie, I think a lot of the newer ones, I think this was probably a good idea for you to kind of start with the newer ones with this movie, because a lot of the newer ones, the episodes are like a lot of other streaming things. So you do have to get kind of invested. Like Star Trek Discovery, it was not really episodic. It was like you sat and you watched the whole season at once. It seemed like, even though they had this, the episodes come out weekly, it was very much a binge kind of show. Like the story just kept going and kept going. I think Star Trek Strange New Worlds is probably the new one out now that's close to kind of like how we know, like the old Star Trek. Like they have one episode where they go into this world and they do this thing, and then that's done. They might have some other stuff going on in the background, but story A gets complete in one episode. So this is kind of a good, I would say this would probably be a good entry for those of us who are older Trekkie fans, right? But not really in the newer Trekkie stuff. This might be a good bridge for that. For those of us who are entrenched in the newer Trekkie stuff, we might have different opinions. So, how about we talk a little bit, since we already started kind of talking about Emperor Georgiou, played by Michelle Yeoh. How about we kind of talk about, since really, to me, that is what that's she's really the center of this movie. And if there are any other movies going forward, she needs to be in it, right? You know, she seems like she's the center of this one. So let's talk about her character a little bit.
So I'll
Yeah,
say, as
Marcy.
someone who is not familiar with her lore or where she fits in, because apparently she's newer Trekkie, I appreciated the backstory, right? I appreciated that they took the time to explain what Section 31 is. I love the
Mhm.
graphic display of like this is the borders and this is where they could operate, and like I was like, oh cool, I appreciated that they took the
Yeah.
time in
Yeah.
what was a shorter version of a movie to give me that, and I appreciated seeing her story from the challenge to making the choices that she made to becoming the emperor and mass murderer, like the modern day Nero type kind of vibe.
Yeah.
I appreciate and
She's worse
understand
than
it because
that.
oh, she was worse. But in that vein,
Nero put together.
right? She did a lot, and not remorseful is another thing I'm gonna go with.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
she
Not
is
quite.
kind of
I mean, she
remorseful
and the
in a way,
girl
but not really. I mean,
at the
it's
end. I think at the end, I think okay, we're skipping ahead. For the beginning, I felt like they did a good job of helping to help me understand who she was, how she became who she was, and why that was important to the story arc, right? Because
Hmm.
had they not, I would have been like, why are they chasing her? What is happening here? Wish I had been aware of the number of times we were gonna switch from one time period to another. It got a little difficult to figure out where we were, who was where, doing what. There was a lot of everything everywhere all at once type kind of things. There were all these things where she was like in a flashback, but
Which is another movie that Michelle
right,
Yeoh
which
is
is
in.
exactly
Everything
very much
everywhere
so.
all at once.
So I think that was a little. I wasn't used to that much of the way that the storytelling operates. And so it took me a minute at the beginning to get used to everything coming from every direction and trying to make sure I knew where I was. And I think it got even more complicated when the characters all weren't exactly who they could have been, should have been, were. I mean, we had the shapeshifter, we had the little tiny man in the body. At one point, it was like, is anybody who they really say they are, which made it just a little bit more harder to know what I was watching, right? Because I was never 100% sure that I was watching the real version of anybody. But I think that also added to parts of the thing, especially like the tenseness in the moment when they're all together before the first betrayal, when he says, I'm still
still
taking
on
over his.
autopilot.
Yeah, I'm still on autopilot.
Hmm.
No, even before that, the one where he says, I still have, still, yeah, autopiloting Griff Zepp's body. That one,
Hmm.
the first time, all of that I think added to the quality of that scene and trying to know who to trust and what was happening. But it was a lot, and it was dark for a lot of that movie,
Yeah.
which in some ways made it hard. Also, love Michelle Yeoh. Was grateful for closed captioning because a couple of times I had to go back and read it because I wasn't exactly sure what she said, and I knew it was important. It was so much noise and so much whatever, and she's so softly spoken for most of the movie that there were a couple of times where I was like, "What did she say?" Like I knew it was important because everybody around her was like, "Ooh," but then at the same time I was like, "But what was it?" So I did find myself having to go back a couple of times to read what was happening on the screen. I do think that intro story did almost make me feel for her until you realize just how horrible she became. But in that in between time, between having to make that heart wrenching choice and what happens later, I do think that they took that perfect opportunity to make you almost feel for her. It pretty quickly settles into not feeling for her at all because you realize she just went to the extreme of what a horrible ruler could be. But that the moments where she had to make those decisions, I think Michelle Yeoh played to the hilt, to a true place where I almost felt like, oh wow, like I feel bad for her and the choices she's been forced to make. So I think that was some really good acting in that I did have that moment. I think the story moved along okay, but then it got real fast and then it was over. And I was trying to keep
And,
up and everybody was
and
somebody different and then it was a lot there
And I
at
do
the
want to talk about that,
whew.
but I also want to get Stacy what your opinion of Philippa is before we leave that character.
She's like one of my problematic faves because I like to see her on screen. But I mean, and I can't remember in these previous seasons of the other later Star Trek did they actually tell you how she became the Emperor. I don't. I think they talk about it, but I
They
don't think
did
they
not.
actually tell you because
They did not.
for a long time I was like, how did she become Terran? Because they don't explain. Like you thought it could have been a dynasty. It could have been, and but being the Terrans were all different races and different alien races. It's like, how do they, I mean, I know they are not all different alien races, but the fact that they were over everything, but it wasn't
Hmm.
like, oh, this is the king and the queen and prince. They didn't have any of that. So I always
Right.
wonder in the past, well, how did she become that? And then when you hear, and then when you watch the other seasons, you see that they are really backstabbing, killing each other. And she, think about how they got up the ranks. It's like, did she work her way up the ranks and realize that she really didn't work her way up the ranks? They have a system of how they create their new emperor, and they by
Yeah.
Hunger Games,
Right.
their
Hunger
version of the Hunger
Games.
Games of it. And and so you see that, like, okay, it ends up they get a group of kids, which I wonder, like, how they pick those kids out? Like, these potential kids, we think they will be just fantastic mass murderers and all that. This is the kids we're getting together. I don't, and they get
Right.
these kids, and they basically have to kill each other. And like when you see that she formed a friendship or a partnership with someone, and their final thing is to get, every is to kill their families. And she did it, or at least she did it before he did. She was able to kill, mom, dad, little brother. I mean, just hey, poison soup. Here you go. And that, you think that at least initially when she not killed, I mean, when she killed him. But I think she understood that if she didn't, you could have given a little way. Maybe she thought that if she didn't kill him, they'll kill everybody regardless if she loses. And so might as well get something out of it, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't know. Because you end up
A
finding
no
when she
win situation.
talking to him like they killed his whole village. Even though he didn't
They
do it,
did.
they did kill his whole village. So it was like,
They did.
what's the point? But when she burned him instead of like killing him, I was thinking, okay, maybe there's something left of her. Maybe instead of burning him instead of whatever. But then, and but because I know what she eventually becomes, like, nah, there's no left of that. But maybe
Yeah.
something. And so that when you in the flashbacks, like Marcia said, she going back and forth. But because I guess I've seen some of the previous stuff, I'm used to it. Because when we had Enterprise and some of these other ones, that it was a constant back and forth, and you just had to
Yeah.
like pay attention to once that age difference, like, oh, that's not her when she's young, when it was just her as an adult still, you're like, okay, gotta look at the surroundings, the context clues. Is she in here, or is she in a parallel universe when she was, the emperor? And by the way, that shot where she had that whole lot, that dragon looking robe thing, that was a
Yes.
hologram. And
That
then
was a
he comes
hologram, right?
and then it disappears. I was like, okay. And I know I'm
That was
talking about the
wild.
wrong thing, but I also loved her nails. I
Right?
I mean, I'm not a big nail person, but those, But her and on Wicked, the nails that look like claws, I'm like, ugh, they just
Right.
look.
And she did
And she
like this,
uses them
and they
so
clack,
well.
clack,
Click,
clacked.
clack. I was
I
like,
was like, dang, you
I don't
are
know how
just
can you use
evil.
that in the real world, but
Right.
but,
How did you do
but I loved how she's she's just a good, that good villain-esque kind of personality and role. And when they first see her and she has a club that's, borderline iffy kind of club. It's like, that's if she's not going to be killing the world, I'm guessing the running a, a sketchy nightclub is right up her
that?
alley, where she still uses her, her basically her devilish kind of nature, but
Yeah.
still kind of not be as evil as what she used to be. And then they talk about some of the stuff that she does, but because you know how she's becomes that Terran Emperor, but when you know the previous thing, like, dude, she massacred like planets. It was not it wasn't like, hey, I killed my way to the top. I killed my way to the top, kept myself there, and destroyed anybody, whole cultures. And then
Yeah.
eating Saru's people when they make a great soup. That's why I say problematic, because all the stuff she does is evil. In the end, she does, like, we could tell it. She does say it's a monster that grew a conscience, and so she owns that she was or is a monster, but she grew a conscience, because that's why she left the parallel universe, really, because she didn't have to. She really did.
Right.
And the whole thing, she could have came back with the whole thing they're looking for, the God sin, whatever, and
Right.
been right back where she was, back on top. She could have done that if she really wanted to, but she grew enough, like the Grinch, that, the heart grows, 10 times, whatever it says, the Grinch. I mean,
Yes.
she got some sort of conscience that, okay, what I'm doing or what I am is wrong. But at the same time, you could say, depending on whose perspectives, like, too little too late. My whole family's gone now because of you. I don't care if you got a conscience now. But her best friend, I mean, she when you see the end part of it with him, you realize that she kept him on, that she didn't kill him, and she kept him alive, I guess, to for that part of herself. But at the same time, I don't know. It's just hard to explain. I mean, she kept him alive, but she didn't do anything like they said they did. She did not make the world a better place. She did made it worse. But I guess, spoiler alert, when he dies,
See, that's why I said
um,
spoiler alert, just in case.
realize, she says, "I command you not to die," and I was like, that's, she had some feeling for it, that the fact that she did not want him to die, because I think she realized that would be closing a book on what she used to be, or someone who saw her as something other than that emperor at one point, even though it was buried deep and gone. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I love her character. God, I love her
Yeah.
character.
Have
But
thoughts.
go ahead, Marcy.
Yeah.
No.
Mercy.
They're about paying, so I'm gonna wait. Hold on.
Oh,
They're about,
okay.
but
Okay.
it's just that, overall, I mean, we haven't. The thing is, when I first saw this coming out, I didn't know that was going to be a movie. I just thought it was going to be part of a series, and it shows to me that they're, I guess, testing the waters, so
Yeah.
that it will be a series. Because all this has been a long episode. That's all it was to me. Because it wasn't
Yes.
even a full 2 hours. Like you said, it's like an hour and a half. I was like, they're not sure about making this a full-on episode. We'll see what the, reaction will be, and then we might do this as a series kind of a thing.
Right.
That's what I see it as.
I see it as that too. They're testing, can we do a series about Section 31, and
But watch, and
right, and people watch, and will people follow, because we got Michelle Yeoh here, and she is amazing as Philippa. And she is amazing. As I agree with what both of you have said about the fact that she plays this to the hilt. She is amazing as this, as Philippa. And as someone who watched her on Star Trek Discovery. So she was on the first 3 seasons of Star Trek Discovery before in season 3 before she goes into the portal, which we assume is, going into this Section 31 kind of world. But as I started watching this, it kind of starts out, they give us a star date of 1292.4, which is actually before Star Trek Discovery. So I'm a little bit confused. However, that portal, I can't remember if that was a time travel portal or not at the end of, because it could be a time travel portal. Sometimes I block out time travel stuff. Time travel stuff bugs me sometimes. It's a total mind job for me. And it's like, okay, I can't think about this too much. But Marcie, you got a lot of the backstory here about her that we did not get in Star Trek Discovery. Because when we meet Philippa Georgiou, we meet her parallel person, who is actually a mentor for Captain Michael Burnham in that, played by Sonequa Martin Green. And she is this revered captain kind of person. And so when, all of that happens in Star Trek Discovery and the Emperor comes over from the parallel universe, we get this whole mind shift, because first we're looking at, Philippa Georgiou as this really nice, benevolent, like mentor type person. And then her parallel person is a total evil. I mean, we've said Nero, we've said Hannibal. She was that. She was that coming into the whole. Yeah.
So this is in the middle.
Bad.
This is between. So this must be the arc where she turns into that version of her.
See, to me, this is
like what
thing.
leads her to this is this experience and starting to work with Section 31. Do we think that's what leads her to become somebody that starts Starfleet, that becomes the benevolent version of herself? It's after she gets a conscience, after she meets,
because it's actually the parallel world. There's actually 2 of her. There's there's going to be one of you in this world and one of you in the parallel world. And the parallel world, in this world, we'll say this world, even though it's not real.
In this world, the real.
She was a Starfleet captain, and she was a
she
good
always
person.
was.
She always was.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. That's like
she dies in this world. In this world, she dies though, but she was the mentor of Michael.
Then I got confused that the parallel worlds were 2 separate, completely different people.
They are
different versions of the same person. I didn't get that part.
No. They're 2 different people. Okay, they're not 2 different versions.
Because I didn't know that. I thought she was just. I thought this was the same her, just in 2 different. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now that makes
sense. And sorry about this too, because this is like one of those that whole parallel universe thing. It started with Kirk on TOS, and they went to the parallel universe a few times in DS9. So when we see it in Discovery, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, this is what's happening. But yes, let me clarify, because I really just did a whole bunch of stuff here and probably didn't clarify that. But yes, parallel universe, 2 separate people. So the person in the Michael Burnham in our world, right? The real world, that Philippa died very early in the first episode.
Yeah. And you were like, oh my gosh, why early? Man, you see why.
Yeah. First episode. And then something happens, a portal opens, something, I can't remember exactly because it's been so long since I've seen that but she comes over, the Emperor, the one now know from Section 31, she actually comes through this portal and is now in our world from her Terran empire in the parallel universe. So, yes, two separate people, not two versions of the same person, two separate people, which is why, yeah, Emperor Georgiou is just evil. And so you got to kind of change your mindset. But then at the same time, you thinking, wow, Michelle Yeoh she's acting this. She
Mhm.
is doing it. I mean, she is really doing it. And to be honest, going into this for me, that was the whole reason why I wanted to see it, is because of her and to see kind of where it was going. But I agree, Stacy. I think this is kind of like a test. This is almost like a really long pilot to
Most definitely.
see, right, to see if
Agreed.
they can fly with a whole, series. And I personally don't think so, because I don't like kind of the story of where this is going, which is what Marcie was going to talk about. So, Marcie, what are you thinking about the story, the pacing of this,
So I feel
and
like
could
I'm
you keep up?
okay. So I could keep up. Well, okay. I got lost a couple of times when people had a good and a bad self. It got a little when there was all the Vulcans. It got a little confusing. When the little neuro nano thing was driving people around and the people kept changing. That part was a little trying to figure out where he was and who he was. That was a little hard to keep track of. However, and so much as I think I'm going to disagree with a series because I feel like I might actually watch a series on Section 31 and this group and the missions that they like next on our like it to me that's it's like a Star Trek CSI. Like sure, I'll watch it. I'll watch a case a week. I'll see where we're going and try to catch the bad guy. Why
And I
wouldn't
agree with
I?
Marcy with that. I think, like I said, I know part of the Star Trek universe, but unlike the others, like you said, Star Trek Discovery and all that, a lot of them were like, they were for a season, but it was like a movie season because you had to watch one, two, three, four, five. You had to keep up with every one. And this reminds me more of like old, some of the older things that we used to watch that that was one episode long. I don't see them. I hope they don't do a whole movie, a movie season where you had to see all the episodes, but they have like a mission an episode. I see that and I could see I can get into it. And that's why, I mean, if they do it like that, I can see myself getting into it. And I see
Hmm.
maybe getting other people who are not really Star Trek people, because because you really don't have to understand Star Trek to get it. To me,
I
I mean,
agree. I think
you don't have to. I mean, none of the characters if they
That's
bring
right.
somebody in, they'll be like, oh, they brought in, young old Spock or whatever, they'll bring, maybe do that, but
hmm
it wasn't necessary to keep it. Now they're gonna have to keep Michelle Yeoh on there 'cause
right.
she was a character that just like really had me. I mean, I liked some of the other characters. Some of them I'm like, okay, they're all right, but she was the one that was like,
Yeah.
yes. Every time she came on the screen, it's like, yes. And I know, like, I got the list of the characters. What?
Amari Hardrick, who was he?
Yeah, a
He
lock,
is
And
a
so
lock,
I
a
think
lock
I think you got to
silver.
keep a lock too because I think a lock
yeah.
is the balance
Yes.
to Philippa.
Well, I
I
mean, I
want
think
to see the new nano lady, his wife, who's
his
angry.
wife
She was great. I want to see
Angry
her.
and
and country,
country.
and I was.
I want to see her. I want to see her. Like I would watch just to see where like yeah, I think I
And
could
I was
get
like,
behind it.
I could, yeah, and I do think that, you know,
Mhm.
would be a good show. I mean, maybe not winning awards, I don't know, but I think it would at least keep my interest
I don't know
to
about
keep
winning
on
the award
watching.
because the
Maybe
acting
for the,
wasn't
I don't know,
except for
Michelle Yeoh,
Michelle.
but
Except for
also,
Michelle.
her outfits too. I
Right.
Oh
was
my
like,
Like the
gosh.
costuming, the
you the costuming
wardrobing,
was like, oh
the
my
special
goodness.
effects.
Ma-
I'm gonna give
Maybe
most
that's
of
Oh,
the
I loved.
the
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
ensemble vibe. I'm gonna give like a 10. But individual actors,
Mm,
I felt like I
all
hope
right.
that given
Well,
a bigger
they
platform,
might
like if they got more
yeah.
time, like because I
That's
feel
why I think.
like
Go ahead, sorry.
I feel like that if given more time and they could really build their characters out, I could stick with them. Yep.
And I think they will get better over time. Like I said, if you think
Mhm.
about most of the pilots, even
Mhm.
some stuff that you really like, you see the pilots like, whoa, what did I see in
Right.
this? But then
Yeah.
as they figure out their characters and then like really get into it, like, oh, you see that character development as it goes. We
Mhm.
know at least on this first one, the only one bringing something to the table was Philip because we all knew her. And we,
Yeah.
Right.
Michelle Yeoh, that actress, and so you knew that that was the one we're gonna they really focused on. The others, we could see that there could be some really, to me, we could see some more stuff going on with them that being more depth and
Right.
better, and we might, start to appreciate them more farther along if we get a chance to. Hopefully, we will,
I
but we'll see.
I wish we had had a similar flashback of Alok when he was telling his story. I
But I
feel like we
think
got this
that's
whole. Okay, so you think that might be coming?
if they keep it
Right.
on,
If they
I
keep it
think
on
they
because
will get more into the characters, all these characters'
yeah.
background. Because when they talked about him, I was thinking about who was it Khan? Because
Uh huh.
he talked
Yes,
about Jennings
Mhm.
War,
wars
and I was like,
and making him,
we can
Mhm.
bring
yeah,
that in an episode.
and
Right.
augment. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
but I wish I felt like we got so much of her backstory. It would have been interesting to see his backstory, and would that have helped inform his character a little more?
We will continue this discussion on our next episode. Make sure you're subscribed to Nerdy Romantics Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and visit nerdyromanticspodcast.com to subscribe to our newsletter where you can get show notes directly in your inbox. Thank you for listening.